All right, we are so excited at another wrestling podcast here to have this person. He does not need an introduction, which basically means I'm going to give him one anyway. Legendary manager, reluctant wrestler, writer, wrestling historian, fellow podcaster, commentator, promoter, booker, and quite possibly the most hilarious man alive, Jim Cornette.
John, how am I going to follow that now? You've already you've put the pressure on me. I'm supposed to be hilarious. I'm the most hilarious man alive, and I don't have any material prepared. I didn't know I was going to do the stand-up routine. But how do you keep an idiot in suspense? I'll tell you tomorrow. But anyway, no, thank you very much for having me on your program. I'm proud to be here. I've been had many times before, and this is the most recent one.
How are you staying busy these days?
Oh my God! Reluctantly, I'm supposed to be retired from wrestling. That's what I told myself a couple of years ago. But you never, I guess you never fully retire from wrestling. It's like I won't say a cancer, but maybe it's like fungus on the shower curtain. Just when you think it's gone, it comes right back. I was just in Spartanburg, South Carolina, this past weekend for a Legends reunion match with. It was supposed to be the original Midnight Express, but unfortunately Dennis Condrey had a family emergency and couldn't make it, so it was, for the first time ever, half of the original Midnight Express, Randy Rose, and half of the original Heavenly Bodies, Dr. Tom Pritchard, against Ricky and Robert, the Rock and Roll Express. Handsome Jimmy Valiant and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat were in the Rock and Roll's corner, myself and beautiful Bobby Eaton in the Midnight Express corner. Sold-out crowd in Spartanburg, South Carolina. A great card with Matt Hardy versus Sabu. Ron Simmons and Barry Windham made an appearance. Had a ball. I'm very sore. I feel like I've been beaten by a sack of wet hammers because I don't do that stuff too much anymore. So I was running around the ring making a fool of myself as I used to do, and it was so easy then. And at my advanced age, I'm so old, when I was in school they didn't have history. So I'm sore today, but I'm getting ready to do my podcast, another wrestling podcast, not the one you do, but another one, my podcast, The Jim Cornette Experience, which airs on MLW Radio every week. I encourage you to check that out. Working on a new book on Louisville wrestling history. The Smoky Mountain Wrestling book is going to come out sometime in 2015. I'm going to be making an appearance at the NBA Fort Wayne Mad Ants minor league team on February 22nd at Pro Wrestling Night. I'm busier now than I ever was. I'm staying in the house most of the winter because my bones are old and I get cold. But coming back out, and of course the big event that up your way, the New England Fan Fest this coming June, a literal plethora of pro wrestling pachyderms are going to converge on Providence, Rhode Island for the New England Fan Fest, and it's the first time that I've been in New England, gosh, in years. I've lost count probably since I last appeared there with the World Wrestling Federation before they lost that fight with the Panda Bear, and it will be my only New England appearance, at least of this year, because I don't travel that far from my home base of Kentucky anymore, but I'm looking forward to coming up there. It's a huge lineup and a great facility there, and I'm looking forward to seeing all my fans in New England that I haven't seen for many years, probably all three of them. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see all three of my New England fans there.
Well, including me, that's got to be at least four. So you're.
Well, then there's four. See, I've increased my fan base in New England by 25% just since we've been on this telephone conversation.
Now, I've not always been from this area. I am originally from Indiana, which means that I got to see a lot of your comings and goings. More.
What part of Indiana? What town?
I'm from. It's called Winslow, Indiana, which is about an hour away from Evansville, Indiana.
Believe it or not, Christine Jarrett, in the days of Memphis Wrestling, ran Winslow, Indiana. I appeared there in 1980 or 1981, as a photographer and fill-in ring announcer in Winslow, Indiana, your hometown, probably before you were born.
3 years, actually. So, I got to see a lot. I would, believe it or not, make my mom travel to Louisville every Tuesday, and you know how the Indiana time zone thing is. So the garden would be, I think it was like 7 o'clock, which means that we would cross over the time zone to get there and back. And she would, God love her, take me down there every Tuesday to see USWA Wrestling, and
well, then we've got something in common, because that's how I got involved in wrestling. Is when I was a kid, my mother would take me. Of course, it wasn't that far; it was only downtown. But my mother would take me to the Louisville Gardens. I spent every Tuesday night of my life there from 1974 until I got started in wrestling in 1982.
Do you have any favorite moments from the Louisville Gardens? Maybe like craziest moments?
Oh my gosh, there were so many, and we've talked about it. Mark James and I, of course, he the co-author and major domo of the MemphisWrestlingHistory.com website. He's co-author of my first book on Memphis wrestling, Rags, Paper, and Pins: The Merchandising of Memphis Wrestling, available at JimCornette.com, along with a lot of other fine classic wrestling collectibles. But we are working on this Louisville wrestling history book, and we were talking about some of the wild events. I was at the fairgrounds for the big international flea market this past Labor Day, and talked to one of the EMTs. There was a night that a pregnant woman went into labor, and she would not leave. The EMTs could not take her to the hospital until she saw who won the main event between Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee. And one of the EMTs actually came, and we were talking about that night. Christine Jarrett actually had to talk the poor woman into going to the hospital to give birth to her baby and missed the main event. There was the night that a fan jumped in the ring and attacked Jimmy Hart when Jimmy Hart and Jerry Lawler were beating the bejesus out of Ken Lucas. And the cops jumped in and grabbed the guy, and I have this on videotape, threw him over the top rope to some more waiting cops. And just then, from the other side of the ring, Jerry Jarrett, the promoter, slid into the ring as part of the angle that they were doing in street clothes. And one of the cops turned around and saw another guy come into the ring and almost drew his gun on Jerry Jarrett. That was a night. There were so many incredible nights of wrestling and chaos at the Louisville Gardens, which, of course, housed more pro wrestling events than any arena in the country between 1970 and 2000. And it's just, it's a shame the Gardens is sitting there now. The city still owns it. They're using it for storage. It's an historic building. It was built at the turn of the 20th century. And we're hoping one day that they'll renovate it and we can get back in there and present wrestling the way that it was intended. The last wrestling event in the Gardens, by the way, was presented by Ohio Valley Wrestling, and then they closed the building down, and then they opened it up briefly, and I promoted a TNA event there, and then they closed it back down after that. I guess they said, oh, we don't want to do this again, but we're still hopeful.
You are a self-professed collector of wrestling memorabilia. What is your most prized piece of memorabilia that you own?
Well, you can actually see some pictures of this if you go to JimCornette.com. Not that I'm trying to get another shameless plug in, but I have a section called From the Vault, and it has pictures and some written material on some of my more exotic collectibles, and probably my most prized possession, it'd be a toss-up between the original Smoky Mountain Wrestling heavyweight and tag team championship belts, just because of my my fond place in my heart for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And I also have a bound set of programs from St. Louis that was once the St. Louis office collection under Sam Muchnick, from his first event that he promoted in St. Louis in 1945 to the last, his retirement event in 1982. And the first volume in that set is autographed personally to me, by all the great NWA champions of the last 40 years: Harley Race, Terry Funk, Dory Funk Jr., Jack Briscoe, Gene Kiniski, Lou Thez, Ric Flair. Did I leave anybody out? And the man himself, Sam Muchnick. And that's something that I will prize to my last breath.
Now this is not a redundant question, but what is your favorite piece of Jim Cornette specific wrestling memorabilia?
Well, I love redundancy repeated redundantly. Probably my favorite piece of Jim Cornette merchandise. I've saved a lot of stuff. Of course, my book, The Midnight Express and Jim Cornette 25th Anniversary Scrapbook, which won the Wrestling Observer Book of the Year award a few years ago, and it is available at JimCornette.com. Reprinted a lot of the classic Midnight Express memorabilia, but I'm sitting here looking right now at my office wall, and I have my very first booking sheet and my very first payoff sheet from Memphis Wrestling when I first started in professional wrestling. And I was booked one day that week in Memphis, and I made $50, and it's framed and hanging on my wall. So
That's amazing. Now, you are wildly known for your managing style, your managing tactics. Where do you rank yourself amongst wrestling's greatest managers?
Actually, I just did a column about this for Fighting Spirit magazine, and I encourage everybody to check that out as well. I've done a monthly column for the past 3 years or so for Fighting Spirit magazine, which is the United Kingdom's largest and most prestigious pro wrestling and MMA publication. The editor, Brian Elliott, does a great job, so check it out, Fighting Spirit magazine in the UK on the internet. Everybody asks that question. Either says, "Oh, you're the greatest manager of all time," or "Who do you think's the greatest manager of all time?" I always say I'll accept number 2, but number 1 goes to Bobby the Brain Heenan. He was my idol growing up. I think he's the all-time best. I've spoken to James J. Dillon about that very thing, and JJ agrees that Bobby was the best. And then you throw in names like JJ and Gary Hart and I just did a column where I said Jimmy Hart, I don't think, gets the credit that he deserves because he spent so much of his national career working for the WWF where managers were not really focused on as a linchpin of the promotion. But when he was in Memphis, there was nobody better in the early 80s than the mouth of the South himself, Jimmy Hart. And then you got to go back in the old days to guys like Sir Steve Clements and Gentleman Saul Weingeroff and guys that don't get the support of the fans these days because they've been lost to the sands of time, but I got to see them growing up. So you can't really, it's subjective. It's like art and music. Who is the greatest of anything? You can't really say, but those names that I mentioned, certainly they're right up there. And of course, you can't forget my old friend Happy Heyman.
Absolutely. Now, do you think that managers are missing in the world of wrestling today, or do you think that kind of ship has sailed on that part of the business?
They're in the Federal Witness Protection Program.
Yes.
They're not just missing, they're hidden. And until our industry leader, the World Wrestling Federation, decides to feature managers again on a more prominent basis, I think it's going to stay that way. But then the problem is once you start trying to feature them, where are they going to come from? Because managers are not being featured anywhere, so nobody's getting the experience. And it's a different world. It's like tag team wrestling, which has really been downplayed in terms of its prominence because of the WWE. And I think it's another example of different facets of pro wrestling that we've lost as we've all homogenized into one style and one major company.
You are a huge comic book fan. What are your thoughts on the explosion of Marvel and DC movies these days?
Well, I really I've enjoyed every Iron Man movie. I'm a big Robert Downey Jr. fan. I think they've done tremendous jobs with the special effects, and of course he's a great actor. I enjoyed the Avengers. Spider-Man has been back and forth for me. One of my most prized non-wrestling possessions is my copy of Amazing Fantasy 15 that I got from its original owner in 1973. I paid a whopping $25 for it in 1973. I wouldn't take that for it now.
No, I would imagine not.
But Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the Hulk were always my favorites. I was a Marvel guy because I looked at Marvel and DC kind of like the NWA and the WWF. One was a little grittier, a little more realistic. The other one was a little more cartoony, and most of the time a little more for the young kids. Superman sitting in the barber chair, and the barber can't clip his hair because it's invulnerable, and he's breaking the scissors. So that's, I guess it formed early. I started collecting comic books when I was 6 years old, back when you could actually afford to put runs and sets together. And before I started selling some of them a few years ago, I had every superhero title from Marvel and DC from 1962 to 1975. Still have most of them, sold some of the key books, but I got that Amazing Fantasy socked back here. I'm waiting for the right offer.
Where do you get your signature glasses?
Believe it, I walk right into Dr. Beiser's Vision Center and pluck them off the wall. Everybody wonders, why don't you change your glasses? Well, I found something I liked, and I stick with it. I'm not a big fan of change for change's sake. If it's not broke, I don't want to fix it. And, unfortunately, that's what they've kind of done to the wrestling industry over the past 20 years. It wasn't really broke, but they decided to fix it anyway. And it's like, getting under the hood of your car and tinkering with things when it's running well. All of a sudden, you find out the damn thing won't start.
Now, there's a lot of different, everyone, I guess, seems to think that WWE is the only game in town, but there's a lot of different products out there now. I won't get into all of them, but there's certain new things like Lucha Underground and some. I know that Nigel McGuinness is trying to create his own mini series on wrestling. Do you think that this is the way that professional wrestling is going to have to go to survive, or do you think that it's just going to kind of live on in mediocrity, I guess?
I think actually it's kind of, these are the ways that it's like a drowning man looking for a life preserver. You're reaching out in every direction trying to find something to grab a hold of. And I think the biggest problem is that over the past 20 years, the recipe for disaster in professional wrestling, just add suits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anytime there's corporate involvement or a publicly traded company or a corporation like Turner Broadcasting or Sinclair Broadcasting purchases professional wrestling, business people don't understand show business and vice versa, to be honest. I've been in show business all my life. I don't understand how these people operate or think, these business people. But I think it's worse on the other side. Business people are in the canned good business, not the show business, and they don't understand wrestling fans, what wrestling fans want to see, or how to market same to people. And I think it's a shame. But unfortunately, now we're in an environment where you have to have the corporate money backing in order to get out there and make a promotion. It's not like 20 or 30 years ago when you could start a territory and it was a license to print money, as it was for so many decades. Now you've got to have big-time television. Everything costs more money, and there's some niche products that can survive and have done well, but unfortunately the days of putting 10,000 people in the Mid-South Coliseum once a week or the Charlotte Coliseum every couple of weeks or whatever are gone, and I don't see them coming back. And another problem is everybody now thinks they're an expert.
Mm-hmm.
They know what's going on. We've revealed all of our secrets. You can look up on the Internet and find out anything you want to find out about how wrestling is worked and manipulated and booked and choreographed and et cetera. And as a result, I like to say I stole this from Dutch Mantel, good old Zeb Coulter, who I've known since 1976, but I will use it here as if it's my own. We used to pretend to hurt each other, and people believed it. Now we really do hurt each other, and everybody thinks it's bullshit. So who's the marks?
The WWE Hall of Fame has announced that the Macho Man will be the first inductee of 2015. What are your thoughts on that?
It's about time. When you look at the people, and that's another thing people ask me is, well, what about you and the Midnight Express in the WWE Hall of Fame? Well, it's never going to happen. For one thing, we never worked for the WWE. They can't really make a lot of money, or don't think they can, by selling a best-of DVD of us. They don't like me, and I'm not too warm on them, and they don't really appreciate or like to recognize anyone who achieved great fame in wrestling if it wasn't under their banner. Now, having said that, they do induct people as personal favors or people that have passed on when they go to their home territory,
Mm-hmm.
Which is more due to publicity than anything else, or personal favors to people who work there. But, you can't have a WWE Hall of Fame or a WWF Hall of Fame or any kind of wrestling Hall of Fame without Macho Man Randy Savage. And I always said the same thing about Bruno Sammartino. They finally made up with Bruno. But when you look at the list of folks that are in their Hall of Fame and the list of folks that are not, sometimes they say they're a Hall of Fame that encompasses all of professional wrestling. Well, then where's Lou Thez, for Christ's sake? If they're just a WWE or WWF Hall of Fame, then Randy Savage has been long overdue, so was Bruno, and there's a couple of other names probably as well that should be in there before some of the folks that were done as publicity stunts. Drew Carey, Pete Rose, I could go on.
What moment in your career was so amazing that you forgot that you were working and you looked as a fan?
Pretty much every night I went to the ring with the Midnight Express. because the matches were so good, the people were so hot. We had to enjoy what we were doing, because not only were we making a lot of money, let's face it, but we had to enjoy what we were doing to go through that on a nightly basis, night in, night out, month in, month out, year in, year out. The schedule that we kept, which you can read in the Midnight Express scrapbook, the entire schedule, it was an insane time in the business where it was so hot that we were going everywhere every night, and you had to ultimately, no matter how much money they were paying you, you had to be working with people that you liked to work with, and you had to enjoy what you were doing. And for me to get a chance to main event the Superdome when I was 22 years old, after having been a wrestling fan for most of my life, that was surreal. And then along came the Night of the Skywalker, Starrcade '86, and even I was never a big WWF fan, but the first time I ever walked into Madison Square Garden, I was managing the WWF champion in the main event at WrestleMania. So that's kind of cool, no matter whether you're a fan or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you kind of just spoke on this about like entertainers, Drew Carey, Pete Rose, done in a good way, such as the Andy Kaufman, Jerry Lawler thing. Do you feel that there is a place for mainstream entertainers in professional wrestling?
Well, it done in the correct way. That's the caveat. And the situation with Andy Kaufman was he was presented as an obnoxious TV star that wanted to get into pro wrestling, and he insulted the fans and looked down on them. And Andy was a big wrestling fan, and he loved performance art, and he realized that pro wrestlers were the ultimate masters of performance art. And so he played right along, and the wrestling business was not made to look stupid or goofy, and it wasn't like the wrestling promoters were catering to this big Hollywood star to bring him in. It was that he was a star in Hollywood that looked down on the wrestling fans and wanted to be involved in wrestling and was an obnoxious heel, and there was hometown hero Jerry the King Lawler to put him in his place. And the credibility of wrestling was protected. As a matter of fact, it did more to make people think that there was reality in wrestling than anything probably in the last 30 years, because Andy Kaufman wore that neck brace for months. And I was there that night when Lawler gave him the pile driver. I was the ringside photographer. And I've got to say that the fans in the Coliseum probably loved seeing Andy Kaufman get his neck allegedly broken more than anything else that I saw them love in a long, long time. And that's, there's a difference. You want to get attention. You want to get publicity. But when these wrestling promoters fall all over themselves to have these quasi-celebrities or these, TNA was the worst with, anybody that had ever been, their picture on a billboard on the interstate. Oh my God, we got to have him on our, and it just made them look so desperate, like the old whore, the night before the prom, waiting by the phone for somebody to call her and ask her out, which I guess was, Dixie would know quite a bit about that. And the quasi sports celebrities, like the Pac-Man Joneses of the world, every time some, professional athlete would get arrested, it seemed like TNA would want to book them. And that just, to me, gave wrestling a bad name and made it look desperate. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, and I guess one of the big things that I would like to talk to you about, too, is that you were a huge part of OVW. You mentioned some of earlier about how you worked in the Louisville Gardens with them, and it was a huge amount of success, creating and developing talent that they're still using today, quite frankly. Do you think that NXT is the people are going to get as exposed to the business that they did whenever you were working with them in OVW?
I haven't been there, but I've seen the pictures. It's a state-of-the-art training facility. They've pumped a bunch of money in it because the son-in-law wants to look like he knows what he's doing. They pumped a lot more money in it per month than they gave us per year. But we trained the John Cena's and Randy Orton's, the Batistas, Brock Lesnar, Shelton Benjamins, Victorias, and on and on. 100 and some wrestlers went through OVW that later got national spots on television because we put them in an old-fashioned territory with a local television show, made them local celebrities, put them not only in wrestling school, but also in live events, and we train them to be wrestlers. The one thing that a problem I have with NXT now is they seem like they train guys to be gimmicks. We gave guys gimmicks if they were bland, if they were boring, but we more or less try to train them to be professional wrestlers and to have them get experience in a variety of different situations, and then find what would come out of them and then lead them in that direction, not say, okay, we need a belly dancer. Who's going to play that part? And, they also, the thing is, you have to have a talent roster where there's main event guys, there's intermediate guys, middle card guys, and there's preliminary guys. And you have to have people to fill all those spots. And that's why we would bring wrestlers into OVW as preliminary guys, and we would move them up through the intermediate and finally make them main event stars if they leave them alone long enough. You have to get experience like that. You can't just train everybody to be a star, because of all the people on the card, half the guys are there to get beat. And unfortunately, when you try to just say, I'm going to train a bunch of stars, well, no, you're not going to train a bunch of stars. You're going to train a bunch of wrestlers, and some of those wrestlers that have that talent in them somewhere are going to become stars. So it's just a different way of looking at things.
Okay. Obviously, we know you're a busy person, so we're going to try to, just give you some short questions here. But
my wife hasn't opened the door to the office yet. When she does, then I'll be frantically leaving.
Okay.
But and that's another thing. I don't go on the road as much as I used to. One of the reasons why this will be my only New England appearance of 2015 as at the New England Fan Fest, which is, by the way, we didn't mention June 26th and 27th in Providence, Rhode Island, and it's at the Civic Center up there. Am I correct?
Yes.
Help me out with this. You're the man with the Northeast knowledge.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's a great event. They moved to the convention center this year. Last year, they were also a great place, but some amazing people and talent that are going to be up there. We're going to be doing a live show that day. There's all kinds of stuff going on, and with that being said, I have to ask you, and this is kind of something that's been talked about in pro wrestling a lot lately, is there a downside to being famous as you've been throughout your career? And then I'm going to ask you again, what is your worst fan experience, if you could tell us that?
Oh gosh, well, there's a downside to being famous, I guess, when you get to the CM Punk level where he just wanted people to leave him alone, and I can understand that. And he's a more private person, but you choose that life. But there's always a downside to being famous in a lot of cases. Especially, Michael Jackson couldn't go to the grocery, for heaven's sake, and it might have been better for him if he had gotten out in the real world a little more. But at the same time, we had a lot of bad fan experiences back in the old days when people still believed. Mm-hmm. I've had people attack me physically. We've had people try to run us off the road. I had somebody actually vomit on me on purpose coming back from the ring in Little Rock, Arkansas one night. And at the time, we hated it, especially the lawsuits that erupted or the fear for your life. Are we going to be killed or knifed or whatever? But now I almost long for those days, because at least we had big arenas filled up with thousands of people coming back time after time to see us until we got our ass kicked. And that's lost when everybody knows what's going on with wrestling these days. So it's a double-edged sword. Every time something changes, it may be good, but there's a negative impact also. We had a ton of fan interaction back in the old days, and another project that I've actually been involved in over the past couple months is marketing the classic Lost Carolinas films on my website, jimcornette.com. And I'll tell you how stupid Turner Broadcasting was when they bought Jim Crockett Promotions. And they came to Charlotte to clean the office out, take everything back to Atlanta. They took the TV tapes, they took the rings and everything. But I had told the janitor at Crockett's office, I said, if they go to throw anything away, related to wrestling, posters, pictures, whatever, call me. Instead of throwing it away, I'll take it because I collect wrestling memorabilia. So he calls me one day, says, yeah, we got a big stack of posters and got some pictures and a bunch of boxes of film. What? I'll be right over. And there, over on Briar Bend Drive, where the office of Jim Crockett Promotions was, sitting next to the dumpster on the curb on the street, waiting for the garbage truck, was every single arena match that had been filmed on 16-millimeter film from the 1970s that still existed, that they had thrown away. They weren't TV tapes. It was just a bunch of old film. No, who would want stuff like that? And it was Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel and Flair versus Steamboat and the Anderson brothers and Funk and Briscoe and Race and every great NWA star. Almost 40 hours of this stuff from the 70s that, if not for me hauling it off, would have gone to the garbage and been lost forever. And that's how, once again, that plays into what I said about corporate people not being wrestling fans, not appreciating the sport of wrestling and its history. And so on those films, I had them transferred to video, and I've actually just now transferred them to DVD, and I put them up on my website for Christmas. So if you'd like to see what all the fuss is about, the complete story and the list of contents is on the website, jimcornette.com. But you see in these films the fans' reaction. They lived and died by the baby faces that they loved, making comebacks and being beaten down. And you see fans jumping and attacking Ric Flair when he leaves the ring because he was such an evil heel. And you see them explode and throw babies in the air when a guy like Ricky Steamboat scores the pin. And it was a completely different world. And I was having this conversation with Dave Meltzer where he said he could watch less than a minute of one of these matches and see that those guys were better, more polished performers than anybody in the business today, because not only did they do it every night of their life, but they also had that reaction to learn from, because ultimately wrestling is about on-the-job training. You've got to have the athletic talent, you've got to have the mind for it, but you've got to go out in front of people and by their reactions find out what works and what doesn't work. And that's how you learn and get better. And it takes guys who, the WWE guys only wrestle 3 or 4 times a week now, and independent wrestlers might wrestle 5 or 6 times a month now, whereas in those days, the 70s and 80s especially, we sometimes would have 10 matches in the course of a single week. It's a different world.
Do you think that the common wrestling fans want to be challenged with a more complex product, or are they happy watching what options they have now?
I do make appearances, whether it be at Legends Fan Fest or at comic conventions, where I talk to the average mainstream guy that sometimes watches wrestling rather than the people that live it. And I don't talk to a lot of wrestling fans that are really happy at all. They either miss what they grew up with or miss the flavor and the style of the way wrestling used to be before it got silly and all about entertainment and comedy instead of people fighting. I've said many times the UFC is the most successful pro wrestling promotion in the world right now.
Yeah.
I think that, there's fans of different styles of wrestling, whether it be lucha, whether it be Ring of Honor, whether it be on the independent level, but there's just not as many fans as there used to be of any kind of wrestling. Mm-hmm. And I think I don't even know if they're waiting for something different or if they're just longing for the days when they saw guys that legitimately looked like they were mad at each other, legitimately looking like they were fighting with each other instead of now knowing. It's like when you found out Santa Claus wasn't really coming down the chimney. I was like, I'm going to get the present, but the delivery method was so much cooler. I'm
just going to say that's a spoiler alert to any of you out there who still believe in Santa Claus.
Oh, yeah. Now see, I've ruined Christmas for half your audience. Now there is no Santa Claus. Yes, Virginia, there is no kayfabe anymore, and unfortunately, that everybody likes to get information that nobody has, and they enjoy finding out something like that, and then later on they realize, it was kind of more fun when I didn't know how all this shit worked.
Yeah, and with social media, that's and shoot interviews and all different kinds of ways to air your grievances. I think that that pro wrestling just kind of lost some of that. I don't know, like you're saying, the sizzle. Because if somebody, I've seen it, and it's good in a way if a promoter screws somebody over or whatever, but I don't want to know what a wrestler is eating or what they're doing. Like, it makes you lose some of that whenever.
Well, I will say some of the fans have gotten more of a respect for the way wrestling used to be than they had when it actually used to be that way. Now, in another one of my many projects in my retirement, I host Back to the Territories. It's a series of videos for kayfabe commentaries. You can go to shootinterviews.com and find out their entire line of projects. But we take a main event star from a territory of days gone by, and we do kind of a docu shoot where we not only tell the folks the history of that particular territory, such as Mid-South Wrestling with Hacksaw Jim Duggan that's already been released, or the upcoming Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, Jim Crockett Promotions with James J. Dillon, but we take you into what it was like for the wrestlers who were working the territory, traveling the roads every night, what the schedule was like, what the locker room was like, and we found that a lot more wrestling fans these days are interested in finding out things like that than they are actually interested in the not only the newer wrestling but also the dirt and the gossip. It's not a tell-all type of thing. It instructs you. It's informative and entertaining at the same time, where you kind of get to live in these guys' shoes. So that's another project that I'm involved in that I've been really excited about. We've got a lot of great feedback on, and I love professional wrestling. It's now sports entertainment. That's not something I love, but I love keeping the stories and the flavor of pro wrestling alive. And with projects like those, it's fun, entertaining, and it keeps me off the street at night.
Well, that's probably a good thing in a way for you and the street, I guess. But
yeah, especially that street. That street could get in trouble if I was on it late at night.
How many tennis rackets have you had throughout your career? And did you ever wish that you used anything other than a tennis racket?
No, I've always been happy with it because it's very hard to do anything for the first time in an industry that had been around for 80 years at the point you got into it. Something else always reflects on the first person that did it. So you're copying somebody, but the racket is pretty much universally recognized as Jim Cornette's, and people have done it since then. I look at it as an homage rather than theft, but every time somebody sees a tennis racket that's a wrestling fan, they think of me. And that's, like I said, when I didn't even pick one up until I started in wrestling, and the year afterwards, as a matter of fact, 1983 is the first time I started carrying it. Pro wrestling had been around since the dawn of the century, and nobody had used a tennis racket. So I scored one there. I'm very happy with it. Wouldn't have changed anything for anybody.
Okay. Now, of course, I've seen on your website, JimCornette.com, that there is a
website called JimCornette.com. I wasn't aware of that.
It's a really good website, and there's a tab on there that you maybe don't get to talk about a lot, but it's Now with Tomato. And you're somewhat of a self-professed food lover. So what are some of your favorite places to eat on the road?
Oh, gosh, and Now with Tomato is the restaurant reviews that my wife and I do, and we got to get some new ones up. But I've been on a diet the past couple of years because my weight was getting up there, and I had to watch my girlish figure. So many of my contemporaries were having heart attacks, and I lost a lot of weight, so we don't go crazy like we used to. But some of my favorite places to eat, my gosh, on the road, you can read about a bunch of them, but right here in Louisville, Mark's Feed Store is the best barbecue in town, and good Kentucky burgoo, which if you haven't had it, is an amazing. It's not soup, it's not stew, it's burgoo. And also Clarksville Seafood, a big old hangout of the wrestlers over in Clarksville, Indiana, back for the last 35 years. But I enjoy, Huge Ass Burgers in Lexington for burgers, and Hattie B's Hot Chicken in Nashville, Tennessee for the best fried chicken you'll ever put in your mouth. And there's a place, we used to go to the St. Elmo Steakhouse, which is legendary in Indianapolis. And my gosh, you're making me hungry, Josh. I could go on, but go to the website, read the reviews.
Awesome. We'll look at some of them in Rhode Island for you. That way, when you come up, we'll find someplace good for you.
There you go. It might even be better if it's not good for me.
Okay, yeah.
As long as it's good food, it doesn't have to be good for me because I do cheat on my diet when I'm on the road.
Okay.
Who is the worst person to ever be involved in wrestling?
Now, you're going to make me utter that name. I won't even utter the name, but everybody knows who it is. The pyro guy. I'm not going to give him any publicity, but
perfect.
I've always said that whenever that particular individual who claims responsibility for the Attitude Era and for making all these stars, and he invented air and water and trees and everything, whenever he dies, his funeral is going to be the most well-attended funeral in the history of the world, because you know the old saying, give the people what they want to see, and they'll come out for it.
So I have to ask, though, is the worst person to ever be involved in wrestling also the worst thing to have ever happened in pro wrestling?
Well, there's been so many bad things over the last 20 years that's a pretty good dogfight for number one spot. But it's just indicative of the fact that wrestling as an industry was one of the most popular, one of the most well attended, one of the most lucrative sports of an entire century, and then suddenly, about 25 years ago, when all the corporate people started getting involved, and it used to be a closed society, it was like the mafia. It was almost impossible to get in and be a made man, but once you got in, you could have a 30-year career and make money if you were any good. Now, any jack-off standing on a street corner can get into wrestling, but nobody's making any money at it. So it's indicative of letting outsiders and people who didn't respect our industry into it, and to change it, that has led to the sorry state of affairs that, well, what was it Elton John said? It's a sad, sad situation, and it's getting more and more absurd.
Now, this is not a sad situation, but I just want to get your thoughts on it. On last year, November 17th, it was Jim Cornette Day, declared by Knox County, Tennessee Mayor Tim Burchett.
Tim Burchett, yes, sir.
What do things like that mean to you? In this whole, you've been a multi-time, manager of the year, and you've been inducted into Hall of Fames, but this is on a whole different level. So what does that mean to you?
Well, I've had awards from the Cauliflower Alley Club and awards like that you mentioned. Mayor Burchett proclaimed it Jim Cornette Day in Knox County because of my long history there. I was a resident there, ran Smoky Mountain Wrestling, tried to do my best to raise the profile of Knoxville, Tennessee, just like I've done my hometown here in Louisville for professional wrestling, and bring Major League Wrestling to those towns. And, you get a kick out of it. You really do. But then in some cases I'm reminded of what Jerry Lawler said one time. Lawler was a partner in the promotion in Memphis Wrestling, and they ran Evansville, Indiana, every Wednesday night for like 20 years at the old Coliseum. And Evansville was not one of the more well-attended towns, let's say, in the territory. And so they folded up, and then several years later he was doing commentary for the WWF, and he came back to Roberts Stadium, and they was sold out, 10,000 people. This was during the period that the WWF was really on fire, and he walks out and he gets a standing ovation in front of all these 10,000 people that have come to see Raw live on USA Network that night, and he looked at the 10,000 people standing up giving him a standing ovation. He said, "Where were y'all when I ran this town every week?" So I guess better late than never.
At the end of the day, when the history book of professional wrestling is written, what do you want written about you?
Gosh, it's kind of like writing my own tombstone. All in all, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. No, the old W.C. Fields line. I just like to be remembered as somebody. I love the business. I tried to make it better, not only for myself, but for the other people that were in it. Tried to entertain the fans, tried to present the best wrestling that I possibly could if I was a promoter or a matchmaker, tried to do the best job I possibly could if I was a performing talent, and tried to respect the guys that had bigger achievements than me and made it good, and tried to tell the truth about the people that try to take the piss out of the business too, because I've never been one to mince words. So hopefully being remembered for doing the very best I could and being honest about the assholes that were screwing it up for everybody else.
Amazing. And lastly, you've dedicated your life so much to professional wrestling. Was it all worth it?
Well, you could always say woulda, coulda, shoulda, but, I saw a television commercial the other day that said that if I had gone to college and gotten a degree, I could have made almost a third of the money that I've made in my life. So I guess all in all, to meet the people that I've met, go the places that I've gone, have what I have now and enjoyed most of it, I'd say, yeah, that's probably a pretty good thing I did this.
Now, other than the New England Fan Fest 5, June 26th and 7th in Rhode Island, is there anything else that you've got coming up other than, like we said, please get on JimCornette.com and listen to the Jim Cornette Experience? Is there anything that I'm leaving out?
Well, I've got just a variety of things going on. I mean, I've had a skydiving group actually invite me. I don't know if I can make it yet. We're still trying to work it out, but to the Bristol Motor Speedway for the big race there in April, and to speak to their skydiving group and be their guests at the race, and do a lot of comic book conventions because, like I said, I'm a big comic book freak too, and I'm a nerd, and I love going and talking to people about whether it's movies or music or comics or whatever in addition to wrestling. So you can go to the website, click on events and appearances, and see my whole schedule. I enjoy getting together with my contemporaries the first weekend of every August at the NWA Legends Fan Fest down in Charlotte. It's a 4-day thing. It's my favorite weekend of the year. And just keep an eye out for me. You never know where I'm going to pop up.
All right.
But I do know where I'm going to pop up June 26th and 27th, and that's in Providence, Rhode Island at the New England Fan Fest.
If you didn't hear him, it's the New England Fan Fest. It is June 26th, 27th, his probably only East Coast appearance this year.
Well, now, I am going to the East Coast. I'm going to be in June. I'm also going to be at Legends of the Ring again in conjunction with Kayfabe Commentary, shooting some more episodes of the Back to the Territory series. But for the past few years, New Jersey is as far north as I've gotten. So to come to New England, yeah, that will be the only time in 2015 that you'll see my face in the place in New England.
Oh, well, speaking of your face, I know I said I'm going to let you go, but I just have to ask real quick, how does it feel to see your face on so many people's shirts? Does it ever get old?
Well, it's great because I'm selling the shirts, and the Cornette face has become kind of an icon for bafflement and bumfuzzlement at bullshit perpetrated by people. That's kind of our tagline. If you're shocked by shitheads and baffled by bullshit, express your bumfuzzlement with a Cornette face T-shirt. And it's kind of it's crossed over outside of wrestling to indicate anything that's just really a what the fuck moment. Make the Cornette face.
Yes. Well, we want to thank you so much for being on our show today, and I guarantee you that this is going to be one of our best episodes ever. Please, anytime that you want to just come on to talk, just let us know. We appreciate it.
Well, John, thank you. I very much appreciate the time, and I appreciate everybody listening. I'll see everybody in New England at the New England Fan Fest. Look for me at Legends of the Ring. Look for me down in Charlotte. Look for me, as they used to say in the old days of silent movies about Lon Chaney Sr., don't step on that bug. It might be Lon Chaney. You never know where Cornette's going to pop up.